Well, hello and welcome to the Smells Like Money podcast. Join me, Suzanne Chin Taylor, the DooDoo Diva, as I interview guests who are making an impact on how we manage and operate systems for conveying and treating wastewater. As a veteran of the wastewater, trenchless, and civil infrastructure industry, each week I'll be bringing you industry know-how from industry pros who know how. Join me each week as I speak with representatives of organizations that are utilizing disruptive or new technologies and methods, and executives who are excited to share how to be successful and sustainable in our vital industry. So whether you want to learn about the latest trends in technology, in treatment or trenchless, gain tips on training and retaining great talent, or simply how to be more efficient, productive, or profitable, this podcast is for you. Ready? Let's dive right in. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the DooDoo Divas Smells Like Money podcast. Today, we are visiting with Bryan Grogan, the Senior Vice President of PW Grosser. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about maybe your background and also the company in general. Because I understand it's an engineering firm, but it does a lot of interesting things and has its kind of, hands in a lot of different arenas.
So PW Grosser itself was founded in early 1990s by Paul Grosser, and we kind of specialized in a little bit of everything. So we are a civil environmental engineering firm. Our kind of territory is, so to speak, Manhattan to Montauk. Largely it, but we handle, civil engineering from grading, drainage, sanitary systems to environmental, our standard kind of phase 1, phase 2, UIC abandonment or sanitary system abandonment sampling. We also handle e-designation sites as well as brownfields in the city. A division that also handles a lot of compliance work. So for allied aviation, for a lot of fueling facilities at major airports. We also do a lot of work with hospitals and hazardous waste inventories and management. So it's kind of a jack of all trades kind of firm. We also have some specialty here in hydrogeology, which is unique to the area. There's not too many people that can do that kind of stuff. So we can model things like whether it be nitrogen plumes, impacts on public water well fields, things of that nature. So it's a little bit of a multidisciplinary firm as a whole. Myself, I've been in the industry now for close to 16 years, I think. The first 5 of which I actually spent at the Suffolk County Health Department in their Office of Wastewater Management. So it's kind of where I cut my teeth in this industry, so to speak. And then I've been out in the consulting world for 11 to 12 years. 2 places, but I landed here. PW Grosser have been here for almost 10 years now. Started as a senior engineer and worked my way up to senior vice president in those 10 years. I run the engineering group here, we're about 25 people.
Okay. Well, the reason that I wanted to bring you on the show is because you mentioned some very special work that you're doing in the Long Island area. And in having to do with the community, just because of environmental concerns, the city or the area is pretty much built out. They want to get people off of septic for many reasons, a lot of environmental concerns, water table, whatnot. But from a logistical standpoint, it's almost impossible for them to do this, or nearly impossible, because as you had mentioned to me, before we came on the show, sometimes a community may just not have room for another wastewater treatment plant to handle the additional demand from all these people coming off a septic, or logistically, just from a construction standpoint or the lay of the land, they physically just cannot make a public system go out to where those areas are. So your firm is working to help that area with a solution. And I wanted you to come on and talk about that project, as this could be a viable option for many other places that are facing the same type of goal of converting from sewer to municipal sanitation. So why don't you just dive right in, Bryan, and tell us all about that?
So it really, I'll say it kind of gives some context to start with. And
Okay.
out here, we're in Suffolk. This is mainly focused on Suffolk County, but again, we have a lot of bays here on Long Island. We have a barrier island, so we have a bay in between the main island and the barrier island. Things have water quality has started to slowly, I'll say, degrade since probably the 60s. Really when this area really experienced its kind of development boom. And what we've seen is that we're seeing more things like harmful algae blooms or brown tides where, we're seeing either shellfish die offs, fish die offs, those kinds of things. And a lot of that's being linked back to by the work of like the local marine biologists and universities, is that it's largely being a nitrogen issue. Their phosphorus also comes into play in certain spots, but a lot of it is nitrogen loading. The excess nitrogen in the summer months when the water temperatures get higher, the bacteria that form the algae blooms kind of breed on that. And next thing you know, that's the fuel source. And now we have a brown tide. Sometimes we have these cyanobacteria tides, where, if a dog walks over and drinks it, it'll kill the dog. Unfortunately, that's happened, I think, at least once out here. So obviously something needs to be done to kind of start rectifying that situation. Part of that was, okay, where, the county looked at, as well as our firm, for a study we did back in 2015 for the town of Islip. Okay, where are the nitrogen inputs coming from? So we did nitrogen loading models and looked at, okay, if we take any agricultural sources, fertilizers, wastewater, kind of look at the magnitude of where are all of the nitrogen inputs, including like atmospheric nitrogen. Not much you can do about that, but we took it into consideration. In those areas, we found that wastewater was largely the leading contributor in nitrogen pollution. Here in Suffolk County, we have about 380,000 homes that are unsewered. We started sewering in the 70s. A little bit of, I'll say, scandalous sewer kind of thing went on, a lot of cost overruns. It was a project that was 98% funded by grants. I haven't been able to say the word sewer in 30 plus years after that project. So we have to look at, obviously, ways to do that. Now, obviously, we've built out the island since then. This isn't like we're going into a new, say, tract development where we've got hundreds of acres of open land and we can properly plan for it. We do that when we develop out here smaller, I'll say, condo townhome units. You can develop an area where we need a treatment plant. We put it on the property, but it just serves that one development. So now we're looking at things like, okay, how could you serve a greater area? The main focus everybody looked at would be, okay, let's go to a municipal style sewage treatment plant with a collection system, whether that be a gravity system, vacuum, low pressure, your combo, get it to a centralized plant. As you alluded to, we've run out of space, and for the gallonage we need, we're not talking like we're going to be able to fit this on a 1 acre parcel. I mean, you're looking at needing 50, 60, 80, 100 acres, depending on the size of this thing. And where are you going to find that? Or even sometimes finding something that's 10 acres in size is almost borderline impossible out here, to find a 10-acre undeveloped piece of property that we can get our hands on. It hasn't been, I'll say, taken over as parkland. We've tried to broach that topic a couple of times, but alienation of parkland is extremely difficult. So in some areas, we can look at centralized systems where you can maybe fit a centralized treatment plant where that works and it can feed a surrounding community. And in others, there's really no good way to get there. So then you're either designing extremely large collection systems to funnel it all back to the one existing plant that we have. And that's kind of what we're doing a little bit on the South Shore in the Islip areas, getting it back over into Babylon, neighboring town to the west, where we have a large Suffolk County owned municipal treatment plant that has capacity. That can only go so far before you kind of tap out and max that one out. So what happens on the eastern end of the island? Because we're not going to pump 50 miles across to get back over there. It turned into looking at what we refer to them as innovative alternative on-site wastewater treatment systems, or they're abbreviated as IA/OWTS. The mini treatment plants. I think these have kind of been around in other areas of the country over the years. They've been used overseas. They're made by a number of different manufacturers. And it's been a topic that's been broached even when I was at the health department. There were people asking about, could we use these? And, you know, it was one of those things of the county didn't want to be the guinea pig, but also didn't want to be the last guy into the mix.
Mhm.
They wanted to proceed cautiously, and rightfully so, because we've seen now, as they've implemented over the past few years, like a pilot program to test these. Some of them do much better than others. Some of them live up to the testing data that they're providing, and some of them fall short. And obviously, if we're trying to solve the problem, we don't want to, you know, litter the area with a bunch of systems that are just never going to make it. But we're trying to use those now in areas where it may not be feasible for widespread municipal sewers. And like you alluded to, it's either space concerns is number one, is can you even do it? If you can get past that hurdle, the next thing that always comes up is cost, and cost to taxpayers. And that's something that, you know, everybody kind of, I'll say, shakes a little bit when you start talking about it. Or myself, just like you don't want to necessarily pay more in taxes for something, but at the same token, we need this to happen, because the health of our water is not only is it just I'll say an aesthetics thing, a tourism thing, it's a key piece of the economy out here. And we also lie over a sole source aquifer, so we're drinking it. It's not like we're getting it from a stream or a river. We're drinking from the same water that we're discharging to. We have to be extra careful. And that's kind of what the county is kind of pushing through there. They did a large study. I think it's the Suffolk County Sub-Watershed Wastewater Management Plan. And they looked at all of the 200 plus water bodies in the county, every river, stream, creek, tidal bay you could think of. Right. They looked at all of them, set up, you know, nitrogen reduction goals, and it's a long-term plan. It has a lot of key milestones, and it's like a 40-year plan. So I like to tell people, you know, it took us 40 or 50 years to get into the situation we're in. It's probably going to take the same amount of time to get back out of it. Much as we'd all love to wave the magic wand, snap our fingers, and be done tomorrow, that's not going to happen. So, you know, from the financial sense, we're seeing, you know, it's municipal bid contracts. It's, you know, they're great contractors. It's just not always the cheapest thing to do. And that seems to be the biggest hurdle we're having, is trying to convince, you know, or talk to the communities, educate them on why we need to do it, what we're looking to do, try to obtain the grant funding that's coming out of either the state or the federal government to try to help offset those costs, because otherwise they're too burdensome. If you put that out to a bid or a vote of the community, like you have to for a referendum, it's not going to pass. You know, it's you know, you could spend all the time, have all the plans, and everything is there, but if you can't get everybody on board, it's going to go nowhere. So that's kind of where these IAs come in, is that those are a more cost-effective parcel to parcel solution. And there's a couple of different ones. Like I said, there's a number of different manufacturers out there. There are some non-proprietary systems that one of the local colleges, it's over at SUNY Stony Brook, has a Center for Clean Water Technology. It was set up through some funding through New York State that's looking at non-proprietary systems. You know, it's basically sand and wood chip filters. And they are achieving excellent results. Working on things, you know, there's downsides. They're larger, the loading rates are lower, being more expensive because they're larger. So it's a little bit of a trade-off, but the end result is I'll say, treating nitrogen from a raw discharge coming out of, say, a septic tank or a cesspool of 55 milligrams per liter. You're getting it down to, you know, the goal is 19. A lot of these IAs are at below 10. And like some of those non-proprietary systems, the cases are down at 3.
Wow.
off the charts. And that's the kind of reduction that you need in order to actually make the water body improvements. So that's kind of like, what's driving a lot of this. Again, there's a lot of other engineering firms like us that are kind of in similar situations. We're all kind of studying different pockets for different towns or municipalities of, could you do this? Could you do that? And again, we're all kind of hitting the same wall. It's, you hit the wall of space, then you hit the wall of cost, and then you're trying to figure out ways to make it affordable. And, it just seems like without, I'll say, a lot of funding, maybe through like the infrastructure programs and things like that, where that kind of funding comes back, or the development of like a stable and recurring revenue stream. Some municipalities outside of New York have done things where it's, or tax, so to speak, on water. So for purchased water, it's whatever. Let's just say it's, a couple of fractional cents per gallon goes into a different bucket, and that's used for helping to get bonds and offsets for additional water, wastewater infrastructure projects. That's something that I know the county is working on. And that's a work in progress. But, the things like that would really, I think, help drive the financial end of it. No matter which path you go down, it kind of helps maybe solve some of those problems.
Well, in thinking about the finances, one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking was, well, it sounds like going this route rather than building a huge, multi-million-dollar plant, that this one would bring down the CapEx. But what about the OpEx? I mean, are these small plants then coming under the responsibility and the jurisdiction of the sanitation department, wastewater collection system department to manage them? Or is it the wastewater treatment plant operators? They need to have more operators that are now taking care of these remote plants. How does that all work? Or do they contract that out to a separate company that takes care of all the remotes?
So these little IA systems, they are using remote O&M contracts. So they're licensed, they're basically certified representatives of the manufacturer for servicing. But again, that's something that, and the costs aren't crazy. I think usually on average, those range between $300 to $600 a year. So it's not horrible. It's not much different than, having an oil burner serviced or things of that nature in comparison. Again, though, staffing is one of those things. I said earlier, I think we have 370,000 unsewered homes. Even if you broke that up between, 10 manufacturers, nobody's in 20, 30 years, not the two guys that are there doing it now are not going to be able to service 30,000 homes. So that's a part of the industry that we've looked at that, like, that's in there is does those O&M providers need to gear up and build up? The county needs to gear up, build up to even handle that many number of inspections. And the way the county's done it right now is that we have a 3-year registration. So you put the thing in the ground day one, you have an O&M contract for 3 years. At the end of the 3 years, you have to submit at least one sample back to the county. Now, some of these guys are sampling more frequently because they're trying to prove that this works and they want to make sure that all their systems are functional. But then at that 3-year check-in is, are you passing or not? And then, if it is, okay, great. Then you get your next 3 years. We'll check in again with you in 3 years. If you're not, it's kind of time for some corrective actions. What's going on, kind of situation. So it's a little bit lighter than a traditional municipal treatment plant with a licensed operator, couple hours a day, every day of the week, 365 days a year kind of scenario. But again, it is definitely something that needs to be worked on. And, in conjunction with that, people have talked about, well, what about, the waste haulers? Do we need to pump these things more frequently? Do we need to pump that first kind of trash tank out every couple of months? Is that more so than a regular standard septic system? Out here, we have a lot of sand, so everything leaches. I can tell you from even personal experience, like most people you can ask, where's your sanitary system? If they haven't pumped it, they won't even be able to tell you where it is. You only know if they've pumped it. And it's like, well, when was the last time you pumped it? Well, 20 years ago, I pumped it once. it's kind of like the ultimate set it and forget it kind of scenario. It's in the ground, you forgot it existed, and until it backed up one day. So in that sense, people kind of tended to either neglect it or never see that there was a financial responsibility to maintain it at all. So that's part of what we're trying to, even with the IAs, you have to kind of sell people on. There is some routine maintenance. There is a cover in the lawn that you routinely have to see because we need access to it. Whereas the other stuff, there should have been one, but at the time, things get buried over, the grass grows over it, and you could look out in the yard and you'd never know where it is unless you could find, the vent on the side of the house and start trying to figure it out. But again, the O&M side of things, it's all private O&M for now for this. Maybe it could change in some of the sewer systems we're doing for the municipality. It is kind of right now, it's the municipality's responsibility to own and maintain even like the low pressure pump stations that we're using. We're doing low pressure collection systems in a couple of areas, and that was done more from a constructability standpoint versus gravity sewer. Some of these areas, especially on the south shore of the island, are low lying. Depth of groundwater from below grade is in some cases 3 or 4 feet, other cases it's inches. The good old days of dewatering, 20 feet down to get a gravity pipe in are kind of long gone. The regulations on dewatering now are very stringent. What we did here back in the 70s, we couldn't replicate right now. There's no way we'd be able to pull the permits to do it. Had to come up with alternative methods. And one of those was evaluating things like vacuum sewer and low pressure sewer. And we ultimately decided, look, low pressure sewer makes a lot of sense in these areas. Grinder pump unit on each individual house, and a collection system, and it can move miles without a need for another regional pump station, because it kind of all works as a network working together. So you can kind of link it and build it and expand on it without the need for, say, larger regional pump stations that are more traditional on the gravity. You get to a point, you need that large regional pump station, lift it back up and move it to the next spot. And those, some of the early ones, the county took on the O&M responsibility for those. I think moving forward, that's something that we're looking at, depending on how the funding sources shake out. Could that be something that changes? It might, and that responsibility would then maybe get passed to the homeowners. But again, those systems, the low pressure systems, are fairly reliable. We're using a lot of the Environment One product. They've got a long track record. They could tell us, in other municipalities that they've had pumps that go 5 years with no service calls.
Right.
Where basically all you're paying is the extra electric on your bill, which is, I think, $25 a year. It's basically like equivalent of running a light bulb or two. They're not running all the time. So they run for a minute or two every couple of hours when you're filling the tank up. But if you're not home all day, they don't run all day. So, that's a little bit of how that O&M kind of stuff is kind of shaken out.
Right. How about buy-in from the homeowners? Because you're telling them to convert from something that they've had for a long time. I mean, the first question is going to be, okay, so who's going to pay for this conversion over? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? They're all going to be worried about that. How have they been dealing with buy-in in order to make this happen?
That's probably been one of the trickiest things to date. I've had a couple of different experiences, and we've tried 2 or 3 different methods. Public presentations, standing there with the PowerPoint presentation behind you, do not work. Don't do it. So if anybody out there that's listening from a municipality, don't try to do it that way. We did that a couple of times, and the Q&A just kept going and going and going, and you kind of lost the room. It was very difficult to effectively communicate the points. What we have done is we have switched to more of an open house style scenario, where you have boards and key staff members or members of the community, members of other environmental organizations, members of the county, to kind of address key spots. So we had stuff on nitrogen loading, but we had our friends at the Nature Conservancy were there to kind of help discuss why we needed it. other representatives from one of the other local villages that has these systems there with us to kind of talk about their experience over the last 10, 15 years with the system. There were design engineers like myself that were kind of there explaining how it works, what it does. We had members of the county, you know, whether it be elected officials or staff kind of answering questions. And the homeowner received it in a number of different ways. And it's interesting. There are some areas where we have an area here on the island known, the town is Oakdale. It's extremely low lying. This is an area that you can dig on the right time of day, 6 inches down and hit groundwater. These are people that their septic systems work, but at high tide, it's don't take a shower and do laundry at the same time because you'll flood out the system.
Ooh.
So they have a better, I'll say, or they have a different understanding of a need for something like this. So you can go down there and talk to them, and they're people that pump their systems routinely. They're people that, like I said, can't do two things at the same time on a high tide. And their acceptance of this is much faster. Versus there are other areas where you don't have that component. We had a little bit more pushback of, well, why do I need to do it? What's the reasoning? And like you said, who's going to pay for it was a big one. Again, we had some older folks in the crowd that lived through that past kind of sewer project. And we're like, look, I was a kid back in the day when this was going in, and I knew about this, and, you know, it's just going to, you know, your cost projections are all fake. They're going to triple, you know, and no matter how much you told them it wasn't going to happen, they didn't want to hear it.
Right.
And other people that would tell me, well, I'm going to be dead before this makes any changes. So what do I care? I said, okay, valid point. I get it.
Yeah.
Other people said, you know, no, I remember when, you know, you could walk across the clam boats in the bay and get from one side to the other because the guys were out there clamming and making a living. And I clammed as a kid. We don't have, you know, the clamming decline went from it peaked and went like this. Clam population has yet to really significantly rebound. Not that they're not out there, but that used to be a main economy, and now it's not. So understood that there's a reason why that's important. That, you know, if you want that to go back to that, you know, that's not going to work. You know, same thing like our waterfront restaurants. You know, it's great to go out and have a meal out in the open next to the water, but that's great when the water's, you know, clean. When it's brown and smells, nobody wants to do that. I mean, you know, but that's kind of like the tourism side. And we did show in one of our studies that, you know, linking all those things together, that the cost benefit analysis of it, when you factor in those kind of factors and the economics behind it, it's a no-brainer to do the project.
Right.
The other ancillary benefits that you're going to get, but yeah, trying to educate the homeowners on what it is and what their cost and their responsibility might be is definitely difficult. It's easier if you're trying to tell them it's going to be, you know, $100 a year, but if you're trying to tell them it's going to be $2,500, $3,000 a year, get some that'll do it. But there's others that are going to push back and, you know, looking at it saying, I already pay X in taxes. And, you know, it's not an incremental. I mean, that's a significant, in some cases that could be, you know, 50% of what they're paying right now in taxes. So it's a major add. And that's why we've been working with, you know, different, like I said, funding agencies to try to get that number down to a reasonable number that people are, I'll say, comfortable with. And will accept and say, okay, I can do that. But yeah, it's definitely, you know, that whole public outreach, public education part is definitely something that's very critical. And it's not second nature to people like myself. You know, we're engineers. We can speak in a language that with other engineers, you can say things and people understand if you're skipping words or parts or connect the dots, and you have to learn how to tailor the message to the audience. And again, I've had the benefit of learning myself firsthand. I did a couple of these and learned from one to the next, and it's gotten better. And I think I'm better at now communicating what is, what are we trying to do? What's the problem we're trying to solve? Why is this important? And trying to show people that even if they may not care themselves, why they should care as a whole. And again, that's a little bit of a difficult message to send, but it needs to happen.
That's great advice there. So Bryan, thank you so much for, coming on the show and telling us about this project, because I think that, it could be a nice example of just bringing to light options that others may not have thought were possible. And that, you're a shining example of it can be done. Can't be done. Like you said, it took 40 years to get to this point. You can't do it overnight, but taking it in little tiny pieces or parcels and rolling it out and proving it is actually, showing some benefit for the communities you're working with. So for those who may be listening and want to learn maybe more about this, get a few more details about the work you do, how can they find you and get these questions answered?
You could probably check in on our webpage is www.pwgrocer.com. That's got kind of our links and bios and all of our projects and some contact information there. That's probably the best way to get in touch with us.
Okay, great. So that's pwgrocer, GROSSER.com. And for you, Bryan is on LinkedIn. You can always connect with him. And again, thank you for being on the show. And for those of you listening, until next time, keep it flowing. Thanks so much for joining me, the DooDoo Diva, on this week's episode of Smells Like Money. What stood out to you this week? Share your takeaways by leaving me a review. You can find out more about the new technologies, creating sustainable solutions, and insights on how to succeed in our vital industry by subscribing to the show. Whether you want to learn about the latest trends in wastewater infrastructure, treatment, or trenchless, you've got it all right here at Smells Like Money. If you're an industry expert and would like to be considered as a guest for the show, book a quick chat with me by visiting calendly.com/the2it group/B-A-podcast-guest, or simply click the link in the show notes below. Until next week, a big shout out to all my industry friends and those who will be. You are my superheroes. Thanks for tuning in, keeping it flowing, and we'll see you all next week.